So welcome, Ron, to our Leadership Stories first series, where we're speaking to leaders at the top of organisations to understand a bit about what it's really like in these posts, thinking a bit around what career brought you here, and if there's anything in there that surprised you, a little bit about what your personal style of leadership is, what you think good leadership looks like, and then what you think the biggest challenge that as leaders we're facing today looks like in our sector. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
In our first series. You are currently Chief Executive of Quarriers.
Yep.
Can you tell us in just a few words who Quarriers are and who they serve?
So Quarriers are a brilliant organisation. We're a third sector provider of health and social care services, and we're a charity, and we stretch back over 150 years, so a rich heritage there. But the modern organisation is really diverse. So our roots are in residential childcare. But latterly we've branched out right across Scotland, so we work in 17 local authority areas. We're a large provider, so we've got 1,600 members of staff. We've got an income of £50 million. We deliver a range of services from supported living for adults with disabilities through supporting unpaid carers, youth homelessness, providing fostering services. We also work with disadvantaged families, providing family support. The diversity of the organisation is the thing that I love, and being able to see the contribution that we make across disparate communities and across different areas of life is what we're all about.
So that passion for your organisation is really coming across.
Yeah.
Can you give me a bit of a potted history of the career that brought you to this point? And did you always think that you would be at some point a chief exec?
No, not at all. In fact, I didn't have a career ambition or a career plan. I spent way too long at uni. I did a PhD. And after that, the first job that I took, in part because it aligned, I think, with my values and what mattered to me in terms of my principles, is I took a job with the Scottish Refugee Council. And I loved it. I really loved the work that organisation did, and my personal job, which was to welcome asylum seekers and refugees into their new community. From there, I stayed in that policy area, but I went into COSLA, the local government body. And again, I spent 10 great years in that organisation. And that time took me from the policy area of refugee and asylum seekers into the employers' organisation, where I would negotiate with trade unions, and from there into health and social care. So I didn't plan necessarily to get into the world of health and social care. It was just within COSLA, that's where I happened to end up. And from there, after 10 years, I felt that I needed to and wanted more operational experience, more of a sense of a direct impact on people's lives, perhaps going back to my roots at the Scottish Refugee Council. And so I took the job and was lucky to get the job in the Western Isles, running the Health and Social Care Partnership up there. So I spent 5 great years in the islands, and huge privilege for me to have that job, and then latterly moved from there to Quarriers.
And what have been the key themes? Because I know you mentioned to me earlier you did your PhD in politics,
Yep.
that's been quite a keen interest, and there's opportunities to bring that through, that there were personal and family reasons for moving to a different space up in the Western Isles. What have been the key themes that have moved you through your career?
I guess very simply, I always like to reflect on what matters to me, what's important to me. Am I working in an area that I enjoy and I feel as though I can make a contribution to? Am I working in an organisation whose values chime with my own? Are the principles that the organisation espouses similar to where I am as an individual and what matters to me? Am I working with people that I like and get along with? These are all factors, I think, that have been important to me. And in truth, I've been very lucky along the way. I mean, more than anything else, I've been lucky to work with great people. There was a spell, for example, when I was with COSLA, I worked with 3 brothers: Rory Mayer, who was my chief executive, Ranald Mayer, who was the chief executive of Scottish Care that I negotiated contracts with, and Colin Mayer, who was the chief exec of the Improvement Service. And, being able to work in that environment with those 3 brothers was a great experience. Painful at times, I have to say, but it was it's moments like that shape your career.
So if we think about your career path and where you've come, tell me a little bit now about what you think good leadership looks like, and what is the leadership that you have tried to live, to display, to advocate for?
Mm-hmm. For me, I guess good leadership begins with your values, actually, and what's important to you and what motivates you. Because if you're trying to change something or move in a particular direction, I think the people that you're working with and who you're trying to influence need to know that you're committed to it, and that you not just in the kind of everyday administrative sense, but they actually believe in where you're trying to get to, and that it's important for reasons that go way beyond just a simple organisational interest, that there's something much more important at stake. And I suppose at various points in my career, that's how I've tried to lead, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I've always felt that in trying to do the right thing and bring people with you is the place to start, you know. So, for example, I mean, I remember a guy I had a lot of respect for, have a lot of respect. He's now retired, Tim Davison, who was the chief exec of Lanarkshire and then Lothian Health Boards. Tim and I used to negotiate on delayed discharge payments. There used to be a resource transfer from health boards to councils to support the process of eliminating delays from hospital. And I remember at the time, and this shows you this is a while ago, there was a kind of 6-week target to try and support people to get out of hospital, and we had been negotiating taking that from 6 to 4 weeks. And I remember chatting to Tim at the time, and I said to him, clearly I had the relationship with local authorities and with council leaders, and I said, Tim, if there was one thing that you wanted me to ask, what would it be?
Great question.
And he said, well, he says, I know that we're making progress to get from 6 weeks to 4 weeks, but in all honesty, it needs to be 72 hours. And he said, the reason for that isn't to do with health board administration. It's to do with the ways in which people begin to be debilitated after 72 hours in terms of muscle wastage and in terms of their general ability and capacity in life. 72 hours is the magic timeline. And I suppose I took that conversation and we ran with it. Tim convinced me it was the right thing to do. It was administratively very difficult to sell that to local authorities because immediately that would imply that there's a much more stringent set of expectations around about how quickly people can be supported out of a hospital setting. But it was the right thing to do. And although, and I guess I always saw my role in COSLA as one in which I was allowed to challenge as well as to receive instruction or feedback from councils. And for me, trying to move in that direction was what we needed as a country to do. And I always felt that there was a conversation to be had about how we could then facilitate it, what resources needed to be in place, what protocols had to apply. But that was the target that we needed to actually frame rather than the 4-week target.
So that's still a very live conversation as we speak, isn't it, in terms of the work that's going on? And I'm aware of the work that's happening, especially within Lothian at this time, in terms of understanding the impact on mobility if you are delayed by more of those 72 hours. What was it around the leadership aspect of that? I mean, is that an element of having that relationship that he could ask you that, you could ask him that? Was it the humility of saying, I don't know what's best to ask in this situation? Is it a connection with shared values? What is the leadership piece in that story for you?
I think some of all of that. I often think that leadership requires you to make an imaginative leap into the shoes of the people that you're working with and dealing with. So in that context, it was Tim and I having a conversation about how to reform national policy around delayed discharge. But in other contexts, you still have to make that imaginative leap to put yourself in the shoes rather of the people that you're working with and trying to lead in a different direction. So you need to understand their reality, I think, before you can persuasively make the case for change and to move in a different direction. And there's various ways I think that you can do that. Funnily enough, another example of where I found myself in a position like that also, strangely enough, relates to an issue of delayed discharge, this time up in the islands. And we had, by some distance, the worst delayed discharge problem in Scotland per capita, not in pure terms. And what I found interesting about that was when I was asking questions about why that was, I was getting different answers from colleagues in the council as against those in the health board. So the colleagues in the health board, I think, felt that the issue was really one of capacity in our home care service, and that if the council could sort that out, then the delayed discharge problem would be eliminated. By contrast, when I spoke to colleagues in the council, it was, well, actually the demographics of the islands are such that this is a problem that other parts of Scotland will come to appreciate in the years to come. But actually, we started to dig into the data. And importantly, we did that together. So we brought NHS colleagues together with council colleagues, and I said, well, what does the data tell us? And actually what the data told us about home care was that per capita we had as much capacity in the islands as we did in any other part of Scotland. So whatever else the problem was, it wasn't simply home care capacity. And the data also told us that, yes, the demographics of the islands were challenging, and that we did have an ageing population and a lot of older people living in their own households. But again, you compare it to Dumfries and Galloway and it looked the same. So neither of those narratives were right. And I suppose the point there was that we had to, together, work out what the actual answer was. And it was only when we then, used that as a vehicle to explore, to ask questions, to create a safe environment where you could ask questions which maybe not have been palatable before, that you get to the actual answer. And actually, much of it was just about pretty ordinary things around about how we communicate, how we work with issues such as risk tolerance, and how we structure our relationships. And we made quite remarkable improvements on the basis of those changes. Difficult to sustain, always difficult to sustain, but nonetheless, that process of inquiry and the development of a sense of togetherness, the sense that you're actually trying to solve a common challenge and you're going to do it together, I think was one of the things that made a difference.
Thank you for sharing that. It's bringing me back to when you were talking about your career a bit more earlier, and that sense of what was driving you to choose where you wanted to work and how you wanted to work. We're getting those themes of working with people. So rather than accepting an answer or going with the emails or going to look at the data and see what the data says, it's let's look at that data together and let's create, and you mentioned there, a safe environment where we can explore. And it's okay to ask the unpalatable questions. Yeah. How important is it for a leader to create that space and then to encourage or go first in asking the unpalatable questions?
I think it is important, and I've always felt that in terms of how you operate within any organisational structure, you do have the ability to rely on authority and hierarchy, and I don't know that it always delivers the best results, because if you're trying to encourage people to act or practice or behave in a certain way, you can tell them what to do with a big finger wagging at them, or you can have a conversation with them to understand where they are just now, what the issues confronting them are, and how you move past them. And so I suppose I've always felt that that's a better way of working as you work with people, and will always achieve more sustainable results in the long term. Of course, all of us have to rely on hierarchical structures and systems of authority to some degree. But in the end, if you're trying to affect change, the point is that you need to bring people with you, and you bring people with you by understanding their world.
And that's bringing us back to things like collective leadership, where it's not about what hierarchy is there, it's actually bringing the people involved and the people who understand. And you do a lot with Quarriers, don't you, around co-production?
Yep.
Tell me just a little bit about that and why that's important.
So again, I mean, co-production takes you in a different direction again, because it's not just about understanding the needs of staff, but actually understanding the needs of people we support, and more importantly still giving a voice to those individuals, to allow the people that we support to have choice and control and influence over the lives that they're leading. And that's not just about, support constructs that we've put in place, although that is important, but in terms of their wider lives that they're living, about what matters to them and how we can help support them achieve that. And when you're in such a diverse organisation like Quarriers, that central thread is really important, and those values that connect everything else are really important. So the sense of empowerment, the sense of giving people opportunity, is the thing that connects youth homelessness to adult supported living to residential childcare. These things have that common thread, that common value set that runs across all of it.
And that sounds like we're coming back to a very humility-based leadership approach in that case. I don't have the answers. I don't know. I don't lead on what has to be done. We're asking, we're listening, and you mentioned they're giving a voice. Mm-hmm. If you had to sum up your own leadership approach in just a few words, what would they be?
Actually, I think that's a good summary. I mean, in a sense, I've always operated in my career on the basis that I don't really know anything at all. And actually, the thing that's worked for me personally is by asking questions of others and trying to understand where they are and what matters to them. And as long as you're prepared to listen, and sometimes the answers to the questions that you ask will be unpalatable or not quite what you expected. And it's not to say that you always need to do what they're asking, but in my career, it's been so important to ask those questions, that to have curiosity about people's lives and to use that in a way which is maybe allows you to reset things a wee bit. I mean, I remember, again, and this goes back to my COSLA days, I started working with the independent living movement in Scotland, and strangely enough, one of the leaders of that movement then and now is an MSP, Pam Duncan-Glancy, a very inspiring figure. And I remember working with Pam and other guys like Jim Elder-Woodward in that at that time, and it was around an issue which was politically quite charged, which was around charging disabled people for access to support services. And traditionally, the way that we had set national guidance in COSLA for local authorities to allow them to charge people. And Pam and Jim and others came to us and said, listen, you're creating this policy infrastructure without talking to us. We're the people that are affected. They had this lovely phrase, nothing about us without us. And I guess I reflected on that and thought, my goodness, that's absolutely correct. So we started to work with them, and we didn't solve it. I mean, we didn't, but in no sense did we solve it, but we made it better. And we managed to bring in the perspective of people with that lived experience into that policy infrastructure so that we could actually create something which was a wee bit fairer, a wee bit more measured, and had a sense of progress to it. Now, we've not sorted that problem yet in Scotland because still disabled people are charged for services, but we're on the right road, and hopefully within the next few years we'll move past that.
So thinking about all of these themes that have been coming up, what has been the toughest leadership challenge for you personally? So
maybe I'll tell you about a situation I found myself in the Western Isles where we're reforming dental services. And this was focused on the island of Uist, and it's a long island and sparsely populated. And the Health Board had an aspiration to centralise dental services in the middle, in Benbecula. There was a very clear rationale from a clinical governance point of view, and from the point of view of staffing and resourcing. But there was a major challenge then for communities because it meant people that would have to drive, say, an hour to get to a dentist. And so immediately you had a set of community interests that were diametrically opposed to the interests of the Health Board. The Health Board was worried about providing high quality and safe services, and that had a view that the best way to do that was to centralise those services so that you avoided lone practitioners. You were bringing the dentists together so they could function as a team. There was a better resourcing and staffing arrangement in that case, and the clinical governance was just much stronger. On the other hand, I really understood the views of communities in the islands as well, and the fact that what they saw was yet another public service being taken away from them. The geographical extremities of the islands at Loch Boisdale in the south, they had seen a range of public services close, banks and post offices and police stations and so on, and there was a sense from the community of them losing themselves and all of that. So it went far beyond how easy it was to get your fillings done. And again, I felt wrongly and perhaps naively that I would be able to solve that problem, that I had the ability to work with the community and come to a kind of third way solution, which for me was a kind of hub and outreach model, so that we had, yes, that kind of central clinical service, but that we had the ability to provide outreach services as and when required. And in the end, I think we developed a service like that, but in truth, it probably satisfied no one. And I remember going through the process and just feeling quite a lot of pressure, actually. I remember thinking about how I could help solve that problem, and naively, I thought I had the answers, that there was a third way, another way forward, which would involve a kind of hub and outreach model where you could centralise clinical services within the hospital in Benbecula, but in beyond that, we could provide outreach to communities, in particular to people for whom travel was more difficult. And although in the end we were able to implement some of that, it just felt like I satisfied nobody. The community wasn't really happy because most of them would still have to go to this central point to access their dental services. The health board wasn't especially happy either, because it felt like the proposals had been slightly watered down, and it didn't tick as many boxes from a clinical governance point of view. And I remember, having quite heated discussions with the chair of the health board at the time around about the proposal and how to take it forward. And it got quite political as well, with councillors on the local authority side. And there's me stuck in the middle trying to persuade people that I had the right answers, and nobody really agreed. So I found that really tough. And but at the same time, it's those moments that you come to value the people around about you and the contribution that they made, and even where people disagreed. Actually, I remember having a chat with Gordon, Chief Executive at the Health Board, and he's saying, "Well, I'm not really convinced," but he was mature enough and open enough to go with me in some respects there. So it was a really tough process, that, and I suppose the lesson there was that sometimes you can't please all of the people.
Any of the time.
Indeed.
So what do you think currently is our biggest leadership challenge in the area of our wider landscape that you operate in? Mm-hmm. What do you think is the big leadership challenge of the time?
Well, the entire health and social care system just now feels like it's hanging by a thread. I mean, I don't think that's an especially controversial point of view. Capacity issues, financial issues, the NHS is really labouring. Councils are having to make fairly deep cuts into social work budgets. That's filtering through into the third sector to organisations like my own. And so I think it's never been more important for leaders across the health and social care community to reach out to each other, to focus on collaboration and partnership, to recognise that though that may be more difficult, it will almost always deliver better results than just pursuing narrow organisational interests, because they can often have perverse outcomes which are unhelpful in the end to the thing that you're trying to do. Again, for example, we in Quarriers, the single biggest challenge that we face just now is staffing. We carry around about 4,000 hours of vacant posts a week. That's about 100 jobs. And that has a big impact on the quality of work that we're able to do. So in order to fill those gaps, we have to bring in agency workers. And that's challenging from an organisational point of view in terms of finance, but more importantly, it doesn't work for the people we support, because for many of them, they need stability and consistency in the people round about them. And if new people are coming in through the front door every other day, that doesn't work. And I would rather deliver fewer services well than more services poorly. So it meant that we had to then make really difficult decisions as an organisation to close or reshape services. And I've always been of the view that I would rather deliver fewer services well than more services poorly. So the preservation of quality is always, always, always the most important priority for us as an organisation. And when you are facing such an extreme staffing challenge and you can't possibly staff all of the services that you've got, you are then in a position where you're having to make those really tough choices. And the reason that is problematic, and the reason that quality erodes, is that in the absence of having your own staff team, you're having to bring in agency workers. That changes the dynamics of those staff teams, and it means, more importantly still, that the consistency of support that people rightly should expect isn't there. So I would much rather be in a position where we are reshaping the organisation and better using the staffing resources that we have in order to deliver those high quality services. Behind that lies a complex set of issues that needs political action, to my mind. And the reality is that the labour market, the social care labour market, has been skewed and changed by the experience of the pandemic and the experience of Brexit. So we didn't actually employ a lot of European nationals, but our competitor sectors in retail and hospitality did. And what we've seen over the last few years is people leaving our sector to go into there. And if ASDA or Lidl or whoever is paying more money than we can pay, then it's deeply problematic. The other frustration I've had, and again I've made this point quite openly to ministers and other politicians, is we need to reflect on our national pay policy in Scotland in relation to health and social care. Because in the end, it's taxpayers' money that fund my members of staff in the same way that it is NHS staff and in the same way it is local authority staff. So if you're in an environment where the Scottish Government essentially mandates the pay of third sector providers like Quarriers and the NHS, the question is, why is it different? Why are we rewarding public servants differently simply because of the employer that they happen to be with? So in our sector, a social care worker, a support worker will get £12 an hour from April. In a local authority or the NHS, for a job of similar complexity, it will be £14 or £15 an hour. Why is that? It doesn't make any sense. And the consequence of it is that people will leave our services and go into the local authority or the health board because it pays better. And in an era where people are feeling as pressed as they are, then they will make that decision on economic grounds rather than the grounds of what it is that actually matters to them.
So can I bring you round to ask, what is the leadership challenge in that space? Because you're right, you're absolutely right. And many people listening or watching this will recognise what you're talking about, and it will make crystal clear sense to them, and it'll be a shared frustration. What is the leadership challenge in this space? What do we need from our leaders to be able to move this?
I mean, reflecting personally, first of all, the leadership challenge for me casts in different directions. So first of all, in terms of reshaping my own organisation, to bring my board of trustees with me to get that into play. Then to engage staff so that staff members know that the reasons we're making these decisions are for the right reasons, that it's driven by that commitment to quality, and that it's no reflection on them as individual practitioners. To make sure that we are working with families and the people that we support so that there's an understanding of why we're making that decision and the importance of it. But beyond the organisation, in terms of that external world, to then be able to influence and to make our case openly, but in a kind of measured way. So we have been working with colleagues across the third sectors through our umbrella organisation, CCPS, to make this point. I've been making that point directly to ministers as well. I've been engaging with the media because I think this is a public interest story as well. And I'm not trying to, make life difficult for anybody, but it is a strategic issue that needs picked up. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't take opportunities to flag that and to realise that. And that's not about having a go at individuals or even institutions like government or anyone. It's just about saying there is a set of problems that are confronting us just now in the sector that we need to solve, because the consequence of not solving them is too profound to even consider. So we need to move forward together and think about that in the context. And I know, by the way, everybody knows how scarce resources are. So it's not like we're expecting huge amounts of money to come filtering through. But we need a much more strategic approach to the development of the health and social care workforce, so that we're thinking about not individual employers, not individual negotiations with trade unions, but rather the entire health and social care workforce and how we can actually manage that strategically across this country.
Ron, it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we'll be having more conversations. Maybe I'm thinking a panel discussion around this would be a really interesting way to go. I've really enjoyed our conversation this morning. Thank you for your time.
It's been my pleasure.